Okay. Carl is our first speaker tonight, and I'm going to ask him some questions here in a minute as well. But we have Carl here to talk about developing a product sense. And like I said, this was something that we just talked to him about on our podcast. So I'm excited to be releasing that episode. And this is part of being a developer that I don't think enough people are talking about, is developing this empathetic side of knowing and understanding your customers, your clients, your users, and really putting that into your energy, like what you're putting out day to day, so that you're not just crunching through stories and, tasks and things, but you're like really just diving and putting your whole self and purpose into your job and making sure you're connecting with what the user and the customer is wanting. So super important topic. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say for that. But I want to start by asking you some questions, and I am going to introduce you here a little bit more as well, so people have a better idea of kind of your background and experience. So Carl is currently the product manager for Kendo UI. We use Kendo at my company at Kehi, and we love it. Kendo is just, it's awesome. So thank you for being behind the team that makes that product. But throughout his career, Carl has held various roles, including support, development, sales, engineering, and developer relations. So he's kind of been all over the spectrum there, which is awesome. He understands it from all sorts of angles. He's really passionate about web technologies, and he likes to stay up to date and current on all sorts of things, all the latest trends in like JavaScript and HTML and CSS. And then in his free time, Carl enjoys slaying virtual monsters and tinkering on cars, and then snowboarding. Which, have you ever been in Utah?
So every time I get to go to Utah, it's like the week after the mountains have closed. So I'm about this close to just fly out to Salt Lake and hit it up during the winter, because I know it's some of the best skiing and snowboarding on the planet. So
yeah, those powder days are pretty incomparable. But and then he also likes to rock out to heavy metal, and I'm going to ask you about that, Carl, because I think that's a fun thing about you. So what was the last song that you played on like a playlist, or maybe like a saved list somewhere?
Yeah, so today actually, I looked this up just to make sure I could be 100% truthful. I was listening to a band called Beast in Black, and they're a heavy metal band, leaning a little bit towards power metal. And the song was Blind and Frozen. It's a nice upbeat song about essentially regretting not making the move on someone you loved, essentially. But it's a great fun song, especially if you're in the gym. Plenty of energy.
The one who got away, I guess, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, well, what are some of your favorite bands then? So aside from the one that was just played on, the last song, like what are some of your favorite bands?
Yeah, so my number one favorite band is a band called Fintroll, which is going to sound very weird for everybody, but they're a Finnish band that has mixed Finnish polka music with heavy metal. And they sing a lot about trolls, because in Scandinavian countries, we have a lot of folklore, and trolls are everywhere. So they sing a lot about that. They're a fun band. They are a little bit heavier, so if it's your first time being introduced into metal, maybe ease your way a little bit in.
And what's the name of their band again?
Fintroll, Finn Troll. I can type it in for everybody.
Okay, yeah, dude, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, that's my favorite band, and they sing in Swedish, so you'll have to look up the lyrics. But since whenever they come to the Boston area, my favorite part is that the singer recognizes me now and hands me the microphone once in a while
cool.
when I'm in the crowd. Yeah, because I'm one of the only people that is singing along to the lyrics, so it's a lot of fun.
What he's saying? That is cool. That's one nice thing about being in such a big city, is that you've got all those great bands coming in.
Yeah, it's not, the metal scene in the US still has a lot of catching up to do to Europe, but we do still get some good acts coming to Boston or New York City. That definitely, I'm just like 3 hours away from New York or something like that, so that helps quite a lot.
Okay, well, so let's kind of talk about that though, because you were you born in Sweden or you
Yes.
just okay, so you were born there, kind of lived in between was it just the Boston area?
So I've actually moved back and forth 6 times growing up. Always moved to the same place in
Okay.
Sweden. So Linköping, for those of us who are Swedes in here. I think Marcus might be the only one outside of myself. But in the U.S., I've lived in a lot of different places. So I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, lived in a couple places in New York, and then Connecticut, and now Boston, Massachusetts.
Nice. Okay, so being somewhat familiar then or fairly familiar with the development community here and in Sweden slash Europe, can you kind of speak to like what are some of the biggest differences that you've seen between the two areas? And do you think that there's anything that each can kind of share and help the other kind of, I don't know, like just in terms of like creating stronger communities, is there something that you could say that we could all kind of come together and just create an all around better developer experience for both areas of the world?
Yeah, I think I think, and it might sound like there are two contradicting points coming from one another, but I think there's a good middle ground. And one of the things I respect a lot about the Swedish developer community, and really Sweden in general, is kind of the idea of a work-life balance is kind of baked into everything that folks do. So that kind of allows us, hi to the dog, by the way, that kind of allows a lot of Swedish developers to not just, of course, do what's a part of their day to day, but not, of course, there's friends and family that go along with having a little bit more of a work-life balance. But what's nice is as well, you see a lot of open source coming out of Sweden. A lot of developers are engaged with the community, and I think part of that is because you have a little bit more of that, I guess, freedom, right? You're not at work, 8 to 10 hours a day, every single day, cranking out code. Everybody kind of is a little bit more well balanced. We have a concept of fika, which is essentially like coffee breaks that everybody, it's more than just grabbing a coffee. You usually sit down with coworkers and have a chat, for 15, 20 minutes or something like that. So I think that is something that everybody can learn from, because they're still productive. They can still accomplish quite a lot with their day, and everybody sort of is aware of that. So that's kind of something I think the Swedish developers can give to the rest of the world. And then coming from the US, I really do enjoy kind of I'm not going to say hustle culture, because I do think that's a little bit toxic, but there is a little bit of a sense of hustle coming from American developers. So like, oh, what's the next great idea? What's the next great idea that I could potentially play around with it a little bit? And if you marry the two, I believe that you're in this really good spot where people are just, coming up with new projects, making new products, or making new, just fun, places for the community to gather. And it's a little bit less, stress-free. So it's not like you, for example, join this meetup after, maybe you wrote your last line of code right before you signed on here, right? Especially now that we're working from home, it can be a little bit tricky to say to stop for the day. So yeah, I think that's kind of what both different communities can bring to each other, and kind of get to a good middle ground.
Definitely important. Yeah, I think both of those are great. Just that drive for innovation, but there's so much to be said for that work-life balance and just remembering to take some time just to enjoy not programming for a little bit and letting your brain kind of go over subconsciously everything you've been doing all day, because I think you come back so fresh the next day or whenever you come back to it. So super cool. Thank you for sharing both of those.
Yeah.
And then last question for you before you take the stage is what's the single best thing that you did, or maybe that you even still do, that you feel like helps you stay at your best professionally?
Yeah, I think the single best thing that I've done is really kind of done journaling, I guess is one way to put it. Essentially every day, and I prefer pen and paper. So if you prefer some sort of digital way to collect this information, whatever it might be, every day as I'm drinking my first morning coffee, I sit down, I think about all the tasks that I need to do today. So it's kind of like a to-do list. But at the end, of the day, I kind of write down what I managed to accomplish or check off the to-do list. And if I didn't accomplish one of the things I wanted to do, I kind of write down notes about, okay, why was today a difficult day? And sometimes it can be just on each item that I missed, or sometimes it can be just today was a crazy day with meetings, and I did I was an email took me an hour and a half to respond to, or whatever it might be. And that has kind of allowed me to do a couple of things. First, when when at the end of the day and I said, did I accomplish anything today? I get some reflective time at the end of the day to kind of think about, well, I have accomplished these couple of things at least. Or if I didn't accomplish something because I was super distracted from something going on in my life, I know that's why. And then what that can kind of have as a good effect towards the end of the year is that either for personal goals or professional goals, you have a log of what you have done. So I don't know about you folks, but sometimes I struggle when I go to my manager and he asks, around review time, what have you accomplished, or what are some of the highlights? Sometimes I struggle with coming up with that because I feel like I'm bragging. But what it allows me to do then is go back and look at all the things that I have accomplished and kind of feel good about what I've done. So it gives me time to focus, some focus time, and knowing that I just need to focus on what I need to do today, and then also kind of allows me to stay productive throughout the day, throughout the week, and then it's a great summary of kind of what I've done throughout the year.
Nice. I love that. Really good advice. So thank you. I'm just going to turn the time over to you, though. And we're excited to hear your talk about developing a product sense. So the stage is yours.
All right, perfect. Let me first make sure that I share the correct screen here. So hopefully you folks are seeing my presentation and not the actual presenter slide. Let's see here. Oh, I'm getting Mac OS does not think that I've given Zoom permissions, even though I have. So yeah. let me just. This is, of course, the demo gods coming at us today, right?
Exactly. I'm telling you, the second you are on stage, everything.
I know. So this is going to have me have to quit and reopen. I do apologize for this, folks. I explicitly tried to share my screen with Zoom today. So if you don't mind, I'll pop right back in and out. Is that okay?
Yeah, no worries.
All right, perfect. I'll be right back.
That's actually good, because lo and behold, I did not do a good job of promoting our prizes for tonight. So we'll take a minute to go over our prizes. Christina from STG, we mentioned the one that they're going to have like a $50 Amazon card. So that'll be one of our prizes. We have 2 licenses to JetBrains. You get to choose which product, right, Jason?
Yeah, any product of your choice, 1-year license.
Nice. And then, Breebug, thank you to Breebug. They also are giving a cool t-shirt. Mm-hmm. And then a $25 gift card. So
yeah, I don't have a Breebug t-shirt on today, but they're super soft and amazing t-shirts.
Nice. Oh, and then Jason, can you promote Carl to be
absolutely
cool? And then the last prize, everybody, is going to be, it's an in-person prize. So it's a little bit contingent on if you can come and participate, but we are going to give away a full-on ticket to NGConf 2022. So the ways that you can win any of these prizes, though, we're going to be watching all night for participants over in the chat. And we're actually going to ask our 3 speakers if they can help us kind of watch for, if you could just keep track of like 2 or 3 people who you think have just, been great at participating tonight, contributing to the chat and keeping things going. And then we'll kind of create like a pool of names at the end, and we'll just have like a random spinner help us choose the winners for those prizes. But yeah, so those are the prizes. And then Carl, is it working, or do you need some more time?
Yes, I believe it's working. Let me, I didn't want to share my screen while you were talking, but hopefully everybody's seeing It's over on my left, and now my face is all red, but hopefully everybody can see.
Yes.
Welcome everybody to Developing a Product Sense. Now, I have already had a great introduction, so I'm going to go ahead and skip most of that. But if you are interested in just following me on Twitter, I do tweet once in a while, taking a little bit of a hiatus, trying to stay off social media just for a little bit, but I will be back, I promise. So it's a long name, but it's just at Carl Bergenhem. So just at my first name and my last name together. Now, in terms of the agenda today, I first want to kind of bring everybody in on really what is a product sense. And then how can a product sense help you? So kind of try to convince you as to why you should care about a product sense. And then I do want to, of course, cover how you can start developing a product sense. And if we have some time, I save some at the end for some questions and answers as well, of course. So you folks might be chatting as I'm going through the slides here, but I'll probably cover any and all questions or comments towards the end, if that's okay with everybody. But let's go ahead and kick things off with what is product sense. And product sense really is this kind of intersection between empathy and problem solving. So it's right smack in the middle between these two things. And essentially, the empathy part is really understanding your customers or your end users and help discover something meaningful that users need. So rather than just thinking of your users as somebody that, well, they use your application and that's about it, really start to try to understand what their problems might be. And that can start unlocking some of this product sense aspect. Now, problem solving is another part. Because, of course, when somebody has a problem, we as developers, we can start thinking about, well, how do I actually solve that problem that I discovered that one of my users might have had? And it's also a very creative aspect that you can tap into, because it's not just, if somebody provides you with, I have problem X, then you might have actually 3 or 4 different solutions that you think might be able to help with that particular product. And that's kind of that pain point or that problem that they're having. So that's kind of where product sense is, this intersection between empathy and problem solving. So I have a couple of examples, and I'm going to pause. You don't have to shout it out because I know that I'm the one that has a microphone right now, but I have 2 examples of product sense where I'm going to do a little bit of a description and then mention what product this is. So email users are tired of managing storage. They cannot find emails easily, and they want to combine related emails into a single thread. Can you think of a product that kind of fills this need, or maybe can help a user in this scenario? I'm going to give you just a couple seconds and then reveal that it's Gmail. Gmail essentially came from the idea that Hotmail back in the day and AOL and all these other email clients that had just a small amount of storage for you. It was very difficult to find emails, and every email was just a new item in your inbox. So Gmail kind of was a really good example of some product sense. I have another one here, and that is that users spend time and effort writing files to CD-ROMs, for those of you old enough to remember that, or USB sticks to either backup files or even move files between 2 machines. Also, these backups cannot easily be stored off-site. What do you think this might be? It is Dropbox. Now, there are other solutions out there as well, of course, but Dropbox, I think, is a really good kind of, once you hear that name, you kind of know what it's all about. So these are essentially 2 really good examples of the problems that users had that somebody was attuned to, and then a kind of a clever solution that came to be from product sense. Now that we know what product sense is, how can it help you? Before we dive into what you can do with, or how you can develop a product sense, I also want to just mention why you might be interested in it. And really, the first part that I want to kind of reveal, which might be shocking, is that users do not know what they need. They might have a want, they might have a desire, but ultimately they don't necessarily know what they need. I think Henry Ford mentioned, right, that if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have mentioned faster horses. And that's really a really strong quote for the fact that users don't really know what they need. Now I'm going to toss in this other picture that I think a lot of you have recognized, because this, when Agile was all the rage, and I mean, it still is, but when we were all trying to switch over from waterfall into Agile, this meme, for the lack of a better word, got shared quite a lot, right? And you might not be able to see what the text says because it might be a little bit grainy, but the idea is from left to right, it's a bunch of different roles and how they interpret a problem. So first, it's how the customer explained it, and we can see that it's a swing on a tree that has three places you can sit, and I don't think it would be comfortable to sit on either one of those except maybe for the top. And then you have a lot of different other roles here. So you have the programmer, you have the analyst. My favorite one is a roller coaster, which is how the customer was billed. And then the next one is how it was supported, which is the tree not even being there. But ultimately, the end result is what the customer really needed was a simple tire swing. So this kind of, again, fuels the idea of customers not necessarily knowing what they need. They might know what they want, but they don't necessarily know what they need. Now, some of you might have found yourself in this situation by, asking yourself, why am I even working on this particular set of features, or why am I tackling this bug, or why does a sprint look the way it looks? And have you ever kind of worked really hard to meet a deadline only for users to give negative feedback? So you spent all this time putting data, we're so excited about a release. This is going to tackle everything that the users have provided feedback about. And at the end of the day, they're actually saying, no, this is a complete miss. I don't understand how this is supposed to be better, or why this feature was introduced. Are your roadmaps driven by trying to do as much as possible from our long list of requirements? So I don't know about you, but I've worked on teams that look at the backlog and says it has 100 items. How do we get that down to 0 the quickest way possible? And final one here is, are your roadmaps only set by management, or heaven forbid, a sales team that promises features? I think we've all found ourselves in a situation where somebody comes in and says, drop everything you're doing. We're going to release this feature because I just had a really good customer call, or I know the person at this company and they're really going to buy our product. Or even if it's somebody internal, they might say, oh, we know what this team wants. So we'll go ahead and define the requirements. So in this kind of idea of delivering features that folks actually need, we kind of have this, I would say, this cycle that starts with gathering user requirements. Then we develop features over a sprint, or a single sprint, or several sprints. We work very hard to just deliver the set of requirements that we think that the customer wants. We then release a new version. We sit back and try to enjoy the fruits of our labor, and hopefully hear rave reviews from customers. And we were just sitting there waiting for customer feedback, and then it might start all over again. And sometimes we're lucky. Sometimes we release something, we say, yes, everything was absolutely perfect. And other times, again, we end up in the scenario where users say, actually, this doesn't solve what we had as a problem, or maybe now there's a whole new set of problems. So by taking this and adding a little bit of the idea of products and a little bit of empathy into your cycle, you can actually have a similar cycle with 1 or 2 additional steps added in that can, yes, there's more steps involved here, but this would be kind of done multiple times over maybe a sprint, either every sprint, every other sprint, something like that, and maybe not when you have a full release. So if you think about the previous cycle, it's over one big, large chunk of a release that you're trying to do. And these are a little bit smaller cycles, where when you develop features in a single sprint, you can then ask customers for feedback as a part of that particular sprint. So it might not be a new release. It might be that you have some internal users that are a little bit more vocal about what they want, or you have a beta program, or you have an insiders program, or something like that. You then implement that feedback as a part of the next sprint, and then you release a new version. And then you can, again, gather the requirements. So even doing one additional step of having the ability to ask customers for feedback, I know it seems like a little simple thing. And again, we might have been talking about this when we talked about Agile, but I see so many teams that really the customer feedback only comes after everything is done. for a particular release. So having this be a part of what you do in your day-to-day can start helping you deliver what users actually need, because you're delivering an initial version of something. You can hear their feedback. You can get an understanding of what, were we close? Were we right on the money? Or are we still really far away? And then you can refine, go back based on that feedback, and then try again. Now, by developing a product sense, you can actually use your problem-solving skills and creativity to develop features. So rather than just, again, try to tackle as many features as you possibly can and just think about, well, there's only one way to solve this because that's what we decided within our requirements. If you start thinking with a little bit more empathy of how your users might end up using the feature that you're working on, maybe a bug, for example, is a little bit trickier to use product sense for, but for a feature or for a new version, if you start thinking, well, here are the problems that they laid out, what are some additional ways that we might be able to solve this? And use that creativity that we all have, since really software engineering and coding is creativity. So why not also use that as a part of problem-solving skills when it comes to defining features? You can also start working with a tighter feedback loop and gradually evolve a feature with customer feedback. So this really helps you, of course, establish a relationship, first of all, with the user or customer that you're working with. And again, gives you an idea to how are we even close to where we need to be. And in a kind of lovely scenario, you can stop delivering features based on arbitrary dates. Instead of saying, oh, we need to deliver this new version by July 1st. You can start thinking instead about how do we deliver releases with a certain value. So some folks might have heard, instead of a roadmap, you have a value map, or which essentially is when we deliver a certain amount of value, as in when we know that we have solved a particular problem for a user, that's when we release a new version of our product. So when I talk about delivering features that users actually need, what I'm trying to kind of say here is, rather than look at the backlog and try to tackle as many issues as possible in a sprint, or essentially saying, hey, here's a big list of features. We're going to take it from the backlog, we're going to shove it into this box where the developers live. We're going to crank on that box, and then out comes a feature and out comes a release. We're now shifting the mindset and starting to think about how can we deliver the most value to our customers and deliver what they actually need, which in the end result means that we are probably doing less development over and over again to try to tackle the same set of problems. So what I'm really trying to say here is stop being a feature factory and just trying to crank out all these features, and start thinking about how what you're doing is delivering value to your customers or internal users. I should mention that as well. Now, something that also can be helped by product sense is less email and less meetings. So I'm going to ask a very rhetorical question. Would you like to send and receive less email? I think everybody wants to say yes to this. And would you also like to spend less time in meetings? I think the answer to that is also yes. So I have another diagram for everybody. I love throwing together a diagram. So again, I marked the start over on the left-hand side, but essentially users and development teams often speak different language. So in order for the user feedback to be able to be passed to an engineering team when product sense is not involved, you have to go through this box that I put here that says meet to discuss requirements. And this could be something where a product owner, product manager, so someone like myself, the CEO, CTO, maybe it's your team lead, whatever it might be, they sit down and look at the user feedback. They try to come up with some sort of specification for the engineering team that then goes into sprint planning. So the engineering team takes that sprint planning, develops the features, and then at the end of the day, they ask, is this what the customer wants? Yes or no. And when you're at that yes or no junction, you either, of course, can release it out to the wild and hope for the best, and doesn't always work out like we were just talking about. Or you sit down with that product owner or product manager and say, hey, is this what the user wants? And then you have this interaction that spawns either another email or another meeting, that you need to sit down and review everything that you've done and say, does this pass, yes or no? No, then you go back, discuss the requirements. Why does it not meet the requirements? And you sit in another meeting, you send another email, and then it goes over and over again until you finally release something. So if we can start thinking about how do we go along and speak the same language between our users and the engineering teams, you're still going to meet to discuss the requirements. But if you start kind of developing this product sense as one of the engineers in the engineering team, you might have a shorter meeting. It might just be a quick little, +1 or thumbs up on GitHub on a pull request, as opposed to having to sit down and have a meeting or send an email about a particular set of requirements, because now you kind of are speaking the same language. So you start intuitively realizing, oh, maybe we should do this with the feature, or maybe you have that creativity aspect of it, right? Maybe you have a couple different ways to tackle it that you put together, and then you decide which is the best version of the solutions that you have out there. So this cuts down ultimately on emails and meetings if everybody starts speaking the same language, and you don't have to physically meet or send a bunch of notes back and forth in order to be able to sync with each other if you're on the same page. And actually have a little story about this. So personally, when I first joined as a product manager for Kendo UI, planning could take several weeks, if not months sometimes. Essentially, each team that I would meet with, and we have, at the time I was actually managing 8 different products. So with each team, I would sit down and have 2 120-minute meetings. So that's with each team, it's times 8. I would have 240 minutes worth of meeting minutes. And if you think about the man hours that were consumed by that, right, it's quite a lot. And this really had to happen because I would have to walk through every single item, even though I had the specifications outlined with all the requirements. I'd have to walk down every single new component, every single new feature, every single effort that we might want to work on throughout a particular release. And we would have to do it from top to bottom. Then the team would sit back and think, what can they accomplish, or kind of do some capacity planning. So then we'd come back and meet again, where we'd step through every single item and say, can we do this? Yes or no? Can we do this? Yes or no? And then if there were any questions, thoughts, concerns, or anything like that, that the team had discussed in between these 2 meetings, we would walk through in this second meeting. So this was unsustainable and took a lot of time and honestly company money. So what we started doing is involving more of the engineering team in customer calls. We started having them join in on customer interviews. I do a lot of those where I talk directly with our users. And we started letting in more and more users kind of in an internal program that allowed us to be able to get quick features out to them so they could play around with it and then provide us with some feedback. So by doing this, the engineering team slowly started actually getting this kind of product sense themselves. And now when we have meetings, myself and the engineering team will almost bring just as many ideas to the table based on these customer interactions that we've had. And we've now reduced this down to a 60-minute meeting, and then just 1 second quick follow-up, maybe a couple chats through MS Teams, and then we're off to the races. So this is really cut down on our email. It's cut down on our meetings, and has really made for a far more collaborative environment between everybody involved, including all the different roles. Engineers. We have some backend folks. We have some front end folks. We have designers. We have myself. We have marketing. Everybody is involved and on the same page, and it's fantastic. Now, another thing that Product Sense can do for you, and this is kind of just one slide here, but you can solve more problems and be creative. So as I mentioned, software engineering is problem solving. So why not bring the same problem solving skills and approach to features? Problem solving, it really fosters collaboration within the team. And as I mentioned, if you have this insider program, if you have some way to chat with your users and customers along the way, they now feel like they're a part of the team and they're helping deliver something, which really, at the end, you're just trying to deliver something that helps them, but they feel like they had a part of it. And then they're even more eager to provide you with more feedback. And they can probably provide you feedback in a way that's a little bit more clear to make sure that your team understands kind of what they're looking for. And engineering teams with this product sense kind of involved now can easily offer multiple suggestions to solve a problem, as opposed to, oh, this is the first and best way I could think of, and then that's it. You don't have time to come up with anything additional. You can also run smaller experiments and gather feedback early. So rather than develop a feature for a really, really long time and then see, hey, did that work? You can do kind of an MVP, or a minimum viable product for a particular feature. So the absolute minimum that you need to be able to get feedback, and you can start gathering that feedback early and as you're developing, which is nice as well. And then as a bonus, hard problems or a collection of problems can be tackled by hackathons. So we have a lot of internal hackathons that our engineers love, and I think it's a lot of fun for the entire company. Now, how do we, that's all fine and good, right? We know what a product sense is. We have some idea of how a product sense can help us. So how can we develop a product sense? First, we have developing empathy, and then we have developing creativity. So developing empathy can actually be a little bit simple when you start to think about this. And when you take a step back and just think, why is the user requesting this? Whenever we see feedback or whenever we see a list of requirements, I think a lot of us just look at the list and say, yep, these are the list of features, done, done, done. I have an idea for how to solve the problem. But why is this being requested? If we take a step back and think about it, there's a lot of power in asking the question, why? So why does a user want feature X? You can also start observing users interacting with your application. So, and I have a couple slides on things you can try today, but if there's a way for you to really see how people are using the application you're developing and delivering to them, that is a huge step. I know so many engineering teams that they've released it. Of course, we have analytics, we have logs. You don't really know what happens when a user sits in front of a computer, opens up our brand new Angular app, and starts clicking around on it. We don't know what the struggle is in between. We don't know, are they spending a lot of time on a page because they can't find a particular setting? Or is it this magical metric of, oh, look how much time they're spending on our page. They can't take their eyes off of it. There are so many ways you can look at a particular log and misinterpret what's going on. And really observing what users are doing is a great way to start developing empathy for your application specifically. You can also think about your favorite product or your favorite app or whatever it might be. Why is it your favorite? Have you ever stopped to think of why something was your favorite? For example, my favorite product of all time is Google Inbox, which is now, it's no longer here, so RIP. And at first, it took me a very long time to figure out why it's my favorite. But I realized when I said, okay, why is it really your favorite? It's because everything, including email reminders, was a task. Once you replied to it, it was archived, it was gone. I could hit inbox 0 every single day. It was fantastic. Why are certain mobile apps so popular? Maybe, you can think about an app that you use every day, like Venmo or Wordle. Everybody loves Wordle, right? Why did that become so popular? And there's a technique that I have, which I didn't create this technique, but it's called the 5 whys. And you can actually look this up on Wikipedia. And the example that Wikipedia gives is a really good example of this. So the idea is that you ask why, and then somebody has a statement, then you ask why again, then you have another statement, then you ask why for that. And essentially by the time you've asked that 5 times, you know what the issue is. So the problem is that the vehicle won't start. Well, why? Because the battery is dead. Well, why is the battery dead? Well, the alternator is not functioning. Okay, why is the alternator not functioning? The alternator belt is broken. And why is the alternator belt broken? Well, it was beyond, the alternator belt was beyond its useful service in life, and it was not replaced. So the belt was just old. Well, why was it not replaced? The vehicle was not maintained according to the recommended service schedule. So you either didn't take it to the mechanic, or if you are doing anything with the car, you just didn't check the alternator belt. So rather than the first problem being the vehicle won't start, you're just staring at the vehicle wondering why it won't start. At the end of it all, you have an understanding of what the problem actually is. So whenever we ask why, I always tell people, do the 5 whys, figure out what the underlying kind of reason is, and that will help you tremendously. And now developing creativity is a little bit interesting, but I think my favorite one is spend time with people that already are creative, aka great artist steal. Now, this is a little bit tricky because we might not have these roles around us, but I listed, product managers, VP of product, chief product officers, they're a good source. So especially if you really want to dive into the creativity part, or like, how do you create your own company? How do you create your own product or startup? And this can be a good thing to kind of dive into and follow these folks. But you can also start thinking about folks that you know internally in your organization that are really creative. Why are they creative? Spend some time with them, sit down with them, and think what they're doing that's really good. And again, don't be afraid to steal. Maybe toss a shout out to them, but still, great artist steal, and that's definitely true with creativity. Think about technological trends and how they affect average people. So, for example, cryptocurrency, beyond, of course, what the whole thing with NFTs and everything. What do cryptocurrencies bring to the table, and how do they affect the average person, not just people that are really into cryptocurrencies? Same thing with EVs. And something that we, of course, can think about is the separation of backend and front end within web apps. So for those of you that did ASP.NET Ajax web forms back in the day, respect, but we know that tight intermingling of backend and front end, right? So how did the separation of concerns there really help us develop applications or bring Angular to the world? And even think about social trends and how that's changed your life. So working from home being more widely accepted, how has that changed your life? How has that changed what you do with work? And how might that change how users are interacting with your application, especially if there was an internal application that folks were just using at the company? How has working from home changed things for them? Now, some things to try today, and then we'll wrap up here. So if you're working on an internal application for your business, sit down next to your users for a day, or when they're doing a specific task. Just ask users, hey, do you mind if I sit down and shadow you while you're using the application today? Is everyone remote? Ask somebody to share their screen while they're going through it. Might be a little bit awkward at first, but if you have a good relationship with somebody or slowly build it, then this is a great way to be able to just see how folks use your application. Not comfortable with asking users how to use your app. We can all be a little bit shy. Honestly, just reaching out to them in email, via email or Teams, and just saying, hey, how do you use the application? Or when you need to do this, how do you use the application? That can go a long way. You'd be surprised the amount of people that are never just asked, hey, how do you use this particular feature that I just implemented? And then answer support tickets. If you're not helping out with support, support is a great way to understand the struggles of your users. If you're working with an external application, so you're selling something to customers, then sit in on customer interviews. So these are usually run by a product manager or product marketing manager or something like that, where they sit down and they chat to users and just ask them, how are you using our application, and do you have any feedback for us, etc. Another really good resource is sitting in on customer sales calls. So you can get a feel for what do customers ask initially when they're trying out the product, or what issues they bring up with the product when they're evaluating. New and potential customers can help you explore brand new ideas or brand new features you can implement. And then existing customers are a great way of giving feedback around what they like and what they don't like, and kind of give you these ideas and start kind of developing that empathy of, oh, they don't like this, maybe, but they do like this other thing. Maybe we can learn a little bit from that and use something from what they like and apply that to what they don't like. And again, answering support tickets is a great way to really get down with how your users are either complaining or struggling with the applications that you're building, and start developing some of that empathy and also creativity, thinking about how you can solve those problems. Speaking of apps, right, you can ask your friends what are their favorite apps and why do they think they're their favorite. Think about apps you like again. Why do you like them, right? And I'll mention this again. Why do you think apps like Wordle became so popular? If you start just sitting down and thinking about this, just spending a couple minutes, I think you'll be surprised at what you can come up with yourself. So I think looking at the timer, I'm like right at 31 minutes. So apologies, I went 1 minute over there. But thank you, everybody, for spending time with me today. Hopefully this gave you a little bit of context in terms of what Product Sense is, how it can help you, and some ideas and some strategies for how you can start developing a product sense of your own. Thank you.
Brooke, I think your audio is having problems.
There, can you hear me?
Yes.
Aha, okay. I got this cool microphone, but it does tricky things. Like if you tap it, it turns off. So anyway, thank you, Carl. That was awesome. Like I said, just like when you were on the podcast, like you listened to your presentation and you just kind of walk away feeling really inspired. And I feel excited. Like every time I hear you talk about this, I just am like, can we go to work already? Like I want to go and do these things. So I love it. What I love about it most is that you're bringing back in the human side to development, and you're remembering the person, the people. It's not just about, like you said, that kind of that factory feeling of like, oh, here's another story, get it in, get it done, move on. This is remembering the person. And I think when you can do that, and when you remember why you got into programming and the reasons behind all of it, it's like kind of injecting your career again with this electricity. It's more exciting, it's more purposeful. So I'm really grateful for everything that you share and just helping us remember why we do what we do every day. But we do have a couple questions, and then if anybody else would like to throw in some questions into the Q&A, I know Carl said he's eager to take your questions. So yeah, sorry if I mispronounce your names, I'm so sorry, but it's Yosh or Yash. They say, how can we manage arbitrary date situations as a developer?
Yeah, that's a little bit tricky. I mentioned that kind of as maybe a pie in the sky, because it really creates, you have to create this within the company, right? You can't just say, I as a single developer, and now I'm going to only deliver based on value. Because if the rest of the business doesn't operate that way, it's a little bit tricky. But what I think that you can do is, especially if you have some autonomy over what items you pick when you're in a particular sprint, maybe start thinking about, okay, I see these things are related, and that was a problem that I just heard that somebody had. Maybe if I group this together during the sprint, that is like a little nugget or a little packet of value that I can deliver in this particular sprint. And even if it doesn't spread to the rest of the organization, I think it helps a lot knowing that I didn't just grab a bunch of random things that, one hard problem, one easy problem, one medium problem. I kind of grouped some of these items together, and I know that was, a little bit of value that I delivered within the sprint. So that I feel has been, I've seen at least individual developers kind of provide the biggest, the kind of biggest amount of value, even within framework that might not necessarily have the value map idea in mind.
Nice. Okay. And then Sabrina would like to know what you think about other tools like Hotjar so that you can record how users are interacting with your product.
Yes, the more analytics we have in the better. Hotjar, for those of you that aren't familiar, it's a neat tool that if you have a web application, it actually shows you where users have their mouse and also how they scroll. And it's a heat map that's overlaid on top of your application. So you get really good insight into where are they, highlighting text, are they scrolling down, are they clicking on buttons, etc., or just hovering over a button. And I think these are great tools to kind of allow us to data drive some of the changes that we want to do. The tricky thing is, as I mentioned, we don't always know, are they spending so much time in this section because they're trying to decipher the text that's on the page, or they don't know where to go to find the information, or are they truly really sitting there and they're blown away by what they see. So these tools are really good ways to data drive and say, hey, I want to spend more time here because look at how much time a user is spending, or we can see that the user is struggling based on this series of pages and where they look on the page. So I use that as supplemental tools, essentially, as a way to be able to help bring the rest of the business with me when I'm looking to tackle a particular feature.
Nice. Okay. And then Akila is hoping to come on and ask a question live. So we will let them take over here for a minute and ask their question.
Yeah, I didn't want to send it through text because I felt like I would sound like a jerk. So I just I wanted to ask it in person. But I've never had the pleasure of working with like a product manager, or I've always worked on like an open source project. And one of the biggest issues is that trying to solve a problem or trying to produce a product where someone has like this grand idea is that everybody has a different niche skill set. And so how do you know you're not stepping on toes? Because like me, I came into a project where somehow I became the lead, even though I really was there to learn. But because, like I said, it's an open source project, and it's dependent on volunteers and things like that. I end up kind of like being the lead, and I'm pretty much just a front end developer. I don't know a lot about back end and product design and data analyst. And one of the biggest problems that I see in trying to create something from an idea is that everybody's niche skill kind of gets in the way of solving the problem because they can only empathize, or they feel, even I guess with the empathy, you can only solve the problem within the the in the way that you know how to solve the problem. Like I can figure out how the UI could look, like how, but when it comes to like figuring out, well, what kind of data would we need, or how would the database, how will we set that up? How do you determine when you're not like stepping on toes, or how does product sense work within your niche? Does that make sense? Because it seems
Yeah.
kind of arbitrary, like I can look at those things, but then I feel like, well, I'm not a product manager, I'm a front end developer,
Mhm. Yeah, so really good question. And I think this is where product sense might also meet a little bit of process in this particular case, because I think, what happens a lot is in open source projects, like the scenario you just mentioned, or really coming together with strangers, for lack of a better word, on any project, is that you're not necessarily sure what everybody's strengths are and, who can contribute what necessarily. And it might be, a little bit awkward in the beginning. What I really like to do when I'm first introduced kind of to an engineering team is to kind of see when we have a particular feature or direction that we think that we might want to go down, to essentially come up with, like I mentioned, that little minimum viable product. You see it tossed around a lot in startup terms, so hopefully nobody's rolling their eyes, all the way through their skull on that. But if you are unsure of how to tackle something with this group of people, I think that use the open source kind of mentality, and especially if, through pull requests and issue and discussions and issues, to be able to figure out what to do there. So I think starting off with having, hey, here's what we think that we should do next, and here some the reasons why, and then have an open discussion. What does everybody think? Are these the things that we should work on, and what do you think, based on your expertise, that should be the feature or set of features that we work on next? And then if there is a little bit of disagreement, or maybe you're not 100% sure what the best way is, I say have a feature bake-off, or have folks maybe create like something small that they think is the solution, have someone else do their solution, and see, have people vote for it, and see what they think. It will be a little bit awkward at first with some baby steps, but I think eventually you'll start learning who is good at what, and you'll start gelling a little bit more as a group, and I think eventually it'll become a little bit easier. So maybe, hopefully that helped. I know it can be a little bit of a tricky situation, but that's kind of at least how I've been using product sense in a similar-ish scenario, not open source, but still coming together with a brand new team.
Nice. Okay, we're going to take one more question and then move on. I know there are a few more questions. You're just such a popular guy, Carl. But
I appreciate it.
Yes, well, if we don't get to your questions though, you can definitely reach out to Carl on Twitter, and it's just your name, right? Carl Bergenhem.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'm sure he would be happy to answer your questions there. But
my
the
DMs are
last
open, so feel free to shoot me any question. Yeah.
Good. Cool. And so our last one's going to be from Paul. And he says, is there a methodology or practice that helps you narrow down how to accomplish product FUBAR after you know the why, or the empathy? with tons of options or technologies, it can feel overwhelming at the time.
Yeah, I don't know if this is necessarily a framework that I can name the framework, but I really like starting small. So it could even be a sketch and seeing what folks think about that. There's a lot of examples out there of essentially people, just writing down on a piece of paper, like on a napkin even, and saying, "Is this kind of what you were thinking?" And then once you start getting some feedback on that napkin drawing or that piece of paper drawing, then you might move into the next stage. It could be a little bit more fleshed out design, like for example, Figma, Adobe XD Sketch, something like that. And then all that you're really investing is, the time to put these elements on the page. Then when you start getting some feedback on that, if it's going in the right direction, then you can start investing a little bit more, start writing some code. So I think really the first step a couple steps that we're always so tempted to just say, oh, I need to do this. I'm just gonna, CLI, engine, new app, right? And then go ahead and start developing. But starting as something as simple as a sketch or a wireframe or anything like that, and gathering feedback along the way, you're only investing a little bit extra time and a little bit of extra effort with every step. But at the end result, you can eject so much earlier if it's way off and you need to start from scratch, rather than all the work you had, developing a set of features or maybe a full-blown application. So my recommendation there is, start small and then slowly build. And honestly, a pen and a piece of blank paper can sometimes be very powerful for gathering an initial set of feedback.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Carl. I loved it. I know our attendees were really liking it. But yeah, please reach out to him on Twitter if you have any more questions for him. He's just a fun person to connect with anyway. So, and definitely look into Kendo if you're not already using Kendo UI. They have excellent products and highly recommended. So
yeah, appreciate that so much.
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. So I would have just zipped my mouth, but I believe it. So anyway, Jason, I'm going to have you introduce our next speaker. I'm just as excited for this talk. Jordan is an excellent speaker, and who doesn't like Cypress?
Yeah, that'd be hard to find somebody who doesn't like Cypress. Jordan Powell is amazing. He's on Twitter. He's a developer experience engineer at Cypress. He is passionate about writing good code. And that good code needs to be easy to read, test, and maintain over time. He has over a decade of experience in software development, marketing, design, and video. He also serves as a CEO and co-founder for the nonprofit Dream On Global, where when he's not working, he spends his time as a husband and father and Cleveland sports fan. And something, just a note that Brooke passed on to us. As part of Jordan's nonprofit efforts, he helps to raise funds for single mothers and their children in third world countries. And he helps teach people in third world countries to code and give them skills to hopefully find jobs that will provide stable income for them, which is amazing. So yeah, welcome, Jordan. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I actually just got back from Brazil yesterday, so I'm a little bit jet lagged. It's like almost like 9:30 here, so I'm not gonna lie, I'm like super tired, but hopefully I don't bore you guys tonight. So
you won't bore us. That's awesome.
Tell us a little bit about that. I'm very curious about some of the work that you did with the nonprofit.
Yeah, so I will use this opportunity to plug the NGXP show. I just did a little bit, like, I don't know, it's like an hour-long episode, but a deeper dive into some more specifics of what we do, why we do it, and that sort of thing. But I'll give a high-level like overview here, and then if you want to hear more, feel free to reach out to me, or you can go watch the episode or listen to the episode, and you'll get some more information. But long story short, about a little over 5 years ago, a friend and I, we started a nonprofit, and we do basically like mission and humanitarian work in primarily Central and South America, and passionate about like empowering people to like overcome their circumstances where they're at, and basically like try to, we deal with a lot of people that, have issues and problems that a lot of us are fortunate to not have to deal with here in the United States or wherever we live. Doesn't mean we have perfect lives or anything like that, but just try to equip them with skills and resources and things so that they can live better lives, help their community, and live, basically like dream on, like dream where you're at, do life the way that I believe it was intended to be done. So
that's amazing. I lived in Guatemala for a while, and
nice.
People there live in houses where their entire family lives in a house that's smaller than my office.
Oh yeah.
And so helping people to get stable income. I mean, a lot of times they didn't even know where their next meal was coming from. That's amazing. Thank you for the work you're doing. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
So the next question we have is you're a big Cleveland sports fan. Let's pretend like you can choose any one of the teams to watch for the rest of your life. Which would you choose and why?
Oh, this was such a hard question. I've thought about this. I haven't been able to sleep in days thinking about this question. So my question, I have to ask this first, is this I can only watch the games, or is this like I can only follow a team? Because like, for example, if I have to pick, because like, for example, like the NFL is only like 17 weeks, but it's like the NFL never stops. There's always something going on that you follow, even when they're not playing. But it's like, if it's just watching games, then I would pick probably like baseball, because there's 162 games and then there's spring training. So like, other than like 3-4 months of the year, there's baseball you could watch. So I would pick that if that's the case. But if it was like I could only follow a team and everything that entails, I would probably pick the Browns. Unfortunately, I was like indoctrinated to them as a young child by my father, and I tell him that I hate him for that. But anyways, one day, if they ever win the Super Bowl or even go to the Super Bowl, it'll be that much more sweeter. So
awesome. Yeah, we get a little bit of our sports taste from our fathers, right?
Yes.
That's awesome. So final question. You've worked for some very reputable companies. What are some things that you've done that you feel like have helped you get jobs at such great companies? And this is a question I get asked all the time. How do you get a job at a great company?
So I would say the first thing I realized, like when I made a switch into this, like a career change, like Demetrius had mentioned about like six-ish years ago, and to doing this full time. And one of the things that I recognized early on is that I'll probably never be like the smartest person, like at a company or like when I'm in a room of people, but I recognize that like my soft skills and understanding who I am, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, those things, I really just lean into those things, which really helped me. I feel like just understand myself, and it also helped me be able to recognize the areas of my like technical understanding that, and like the areas of myself that I needed to improve, that then I could go back and like really, whether it be something technical, I could go and look for resources for or whatever. So that's something. And then I would say for me, like contributing to open source, and going to conferences and networking, like those were probably the two like single most like tangible things that are easy to kind of quantify that really changed my career. And I got introduced to like some really amazing people in the Angular community at NGConf, and got then connected with some open source projects that really kind of just took off my career, and got opportunities that I thought I would never get at some amazing companies. And from there, just work really hard and try to treat people the way I would want them to treat me, and it's kind of worked out for me. So
Amazing. Well, we're really excited about your talk. Cypress has been doing some amazing things. So we'll let you get into it.
Awesome. So let me share this. Perfect. Hopefully you guys can see my screen here. But I am going to tackle today a talk called multi-domain or origin testing in Cypress. This is one of the most commonly asked questions. I know Gleb could certainly attest to this, but anyone who's in the Cypress community has been asked this question a million times before Cypress fixed this issue in 9.6. So I wanted to kind of give a deep dive into this issue because I think it'll hopefully help quite a few of you guys. Again, this is a little bit about me. My name is Jordan Powell. I am a developer experience engineer at Cypress and would love to chat, reach out to me, DM me, whatever you want on Twitter. My handle's at Jordan Powell 88. So first, let me explain the history of the problem for those who may not be aware of it. But basically, in the past, Cypress is fundamentally different from other automated testing frameworks in that it actually runs in a real browser. And so that's great. And it gives you, there's a ton of benefits with that. But there was this one really big problem is that we didn't really have a way for users to move between one domain to another domain inside a single test. And so what would happen, and well, first of all, let me explain some examples of this. So common use cases would be you're trying to visit multiple domains of a different origin in a single test, just through site.visit, something like that. Auth workflows, so navigating through auth workflows that span multiple domains, or third-party payment. So if you're trying to test integrations with payment gateways and things like that, these were three common friction points. And unfortunately, these are things that almost every application does. And so as much as we love to try to avoid these things, it's kind of hard to avoid because they're pretty common things. And so how Cypress worked in the past and how it does work now, but I'll show you kind of a high level. So Cypress, basically, when you launch it, it loads this app, and then inside of it, we load this iframe with which we call which loads your specs, which is essentially all the Cypress tests and commands that your browser, that Cypress is going to run, all the assertions you're going to make, all those things. And then we have this thing which we refer to as an AUT, which is essentially the app under test, and that is essentially bound to the domain that you visit. So once you make a call to site.visit, it will actually set the domain, the app that you're going to test, to that as an iframe inside of Cypress. And so what would happen if you would do this in the past is you would get this error, and you would get this friendly little message that would say that you're getting a cross origin error. And so the reason why is that we have a cross origin resource policy. And if you want to go into what that is exactly, feel free to use this link. But essentially, excuse me, it's a thing that browsers put in that keeps other applications from outside of your domain or origin from basically cross-site scripting and attacking your browser. So it's a security thing, and it's a good thing, but it made testing in things like Cypress, this problem, very difficult to solve. So the way we sort of handled this in the past was we had to do one of the following, which is basically not test these cases, which is again not good. We want to test crucial parts of our applications, but in some cases you just couldn't test parts of your application because of this. Or we had to create like specific end-to-end environments. So like if you had like maybe like an environment that skipped authentication or did something sort of hacky to your environment so that you could run it, you would have to do something like that. Or, you know, essentially like trick your app to do something that a user is not going to actually do. And so that's the thing that we want to really highlight, is that the thing with Cypress and the real benefit of it is that you actually test the way a user uses your app. And so we don't really want to trick our apps to do something our users aren't going to do. We want them to function as closely as possible to the way a user would. And so these are three not, you know, ideal ways to handle this problem. So we had this idea that we wanted to fix this problem, and we knew it was a problem. We just needed a way to solve it. And so what we decided is we wanted to achieve the following things in accomplishing this. And one of those is that we needed an API that would allow users to switch into the context of a different domain. So we needed users to be able to go from one domain to another, and we needed users to be able to pass values from one domain into the other. We needed users to be able to retrieve values from that domain as well. We needed to be able to inject Cypress into any of the domains that the user visits. And we needed to be able to set up communication between the main domain and each of the new domains. So a seemingly like simple problem was actually significantly more complex and complicated than what it actually was from a technical standpoint when you actually dug into it. But let me show a little bit how it works. Now, so the way Cypress works with 9.6 and greater is we have the Cypress app, like I showed before. We have our spec iframe, which has all of your Cypress commands and all of the test code that you're going to make assertions on. And then we have the same AUT or app under test that is bound to the domain in which you specify. But we also now added something which we call a spec bridge. And a spec bridge is basically this. It's like the spec iframe, but it sort of bridges your test from one domain to the next. And so you can see below the spec bridge, you define it as domain 2 and set it to origin2.com. So then in the example below, the AUT in the first step is domain number 1. And when it gets to the second step, it switches the AUT to domain 2 and so forth. And you can basically create as many of these spec bridges as you needed to, as long as your browser would not crash. So essentially you specify these spec bridges using the side-of-origin command, which we'll dive into in a second. And it essentially bridges the gap between the traditional spec iframe and the AUT iframe. And again, this is like under the covers, things you don't necessarily need to worry about, but wanted to just highlight kind of the problems, the history, and how we got to where we are, and sort of at a high level, like how it works. So let's look at the API that we came up with. And so we have here what we call a side-of-origin, and it takes in 2 or 3 parameters, arguments, depending upon your use case. But the first one is a URL, and this is important because this is the URL that specifies that spec bridge that we're going to create. So this can be like a host name, it could be a port number, path. The one thing it can't be is query params, because those are not supported at the moment. And the argument will be used in 2 ways. Essentially, this, like I said, that this is going to be this is going to define the domain in which the spec bridge will be created. That will bridge between the first AUT and the second AUT. and it'll also override the base URL configurations. So that way, when you run site.visit and request, it will use inside of site origin, it will use that base URL of that spec instead of the original one. So it's a little complicated, but I'll show some examples and hopefully it makes some more sense. And then it takes us an optional second parameter, which is an options object, and it takes an args property on the object, which is just another object. And what it is basically it's any like dynamic value that you need to pass from the your first origin into your second origin. So maybe it's like if inside of a common use case for site origin is like authentication and logging in. So maybe you have like a login on a third party authorization provider, and you need to dynamically pass in a username or a password or something like that from the first domain, from maybe your app to the authentication provider's domain, and then back. So you would use these args as the mechanism to do that. And then the last thing is a callback function, and essentially this is the code that will actually be executed once you're inside of that new domain, that new AUT. The thing I like to think about with this is that it's like you're making an API request where you're like serializing or you're stringifying like an object or something and passing it across a wire. It's kind of the same concept, because basically everything in the callback function needs to be serialized. So we're basically stringifying like a function, and then it gets deserialized and then ran into the new spec, the new domain, and then it goes back. So it's a little confusing, but I'll show you some examples, and I think it'll hopefully make sense. Other thing too, for those who know Cypress, basically every command in Cypress, for the most part, yields something. And so one of the things you will need to know is that site origin yields the value yielded by the last command in the callback function, and it returns, or if that doesn't, if the first thing isn't true, then it will yield the return value of the function. And if either of those two cases, if the value is not serialized, it will actually attempt to access the yielded value. It will throw an error. So again, everything, all of that needs to be serialized. And if it isn't, then you'll get an error. So let me show an example, which I think will hopefully help show some of it, but I wanted to give some examples. Let me stop sharing, and then I need to share a different screen. Portion of my screen. So yes. Can you guys see this, I'm assuming? Okay, I think so.
Yeah, we can see it. It is a little bit small though. If you can make it bigger, that'd be helpful.
Yep, that was my question. So is that better? See that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so here's an example. This is just some examples of like this failing and passing. So for those of you who don't know, this is Cypress code, and if you chain .only to a test, it will only run that spec with that name. So I'm going to run npx Cypress open, and we'll see Cypress running in just a second, and I'll show you these examples here. And here I'm using Cypress 10. For anyone who hasn't upgraded, you should do it. Let me know what you think, but you get a whole new UI. Here's an example. So there you go. So here's an example of Yeah. Oh, I didn't save this. That's why. Ah. Let me save this and rerun this. Okay, so here's an example of what we were talking about. You're getting this site.origin error here. And if we go to the code, you'll see that we're trying to, we go here, we're visiting this domain. We then try to visit another domain. And here's where we are calling site.origin, but we are visiting this before we actually define this. So it's actually throwing an error. And if I change this, and here is an example of I'm now visiting inside of the origin. So this will get executed only once it's inside of here. And if I change this to this, you'll see this will now pass. So that's an example of, we're just going to go through some like examples of how this works. So again, we're visiting this domain. We're then saying we want to set up a new origin, which we're then going to manually visit it, click on this, this username, type in the answer, click this thing, and then it's going to come back to the original domain. So let me cross this out. And if any of these don't make sense or have questions, feel free to stop me, or we can go back to these. But if I call this one, this is going to call another command before site.origin. So you can see here, again, we're getting the site origin error. And see here, we're trying to visit it. We're trying to get this button that once we click it, it takes us to a second origin. And we're then like running an assertion to make sure we're at this new, with this new domain, which would work, except for we're hitting this cross origin issues. So you could see we're defining this after we actually have already switched domains. So if I change this to and move that inside of this assertion is down, you could see here that it passes. So again, we're visiting it, we're clicking this button, and then we're setting this origin, and then we're doing assertions to make sure that we're in the new domain and or the new origin, and going from there. Here's another example, just a couple more here. These are like common kind of things I've seen from users as well as when I was playing into this. So hopefully these examples will be helpful. But you're yielding an unserialized object. So here we have, we're calling site.origin, fine, we're visiting this new URL, but we are trying to get this DOM element and then returning that DOM element, and DOM elements can't be serialized. And so therefore, when we try to do an assertion on this, it's yelling at us, right? Because we can't return something, because what comes in and what comes out has to be serialized. So if I turn this, here's the example here. We're then invoking the text on this instead of the actual DOM element itself. And here we see it passing. Hopefully that makes sense. So again, here we're returning the actual DOM element itself. And here we're invoking the text of that DOM element. And then I think there's two more. Here we're trying to use an undefined variable. So here we're setting everything to keep in mind is that everything inside of site.origin, this callback function is scoped to that function itself. So here we're trying to access username inside of site.origin, and it doesn't have, it's going to come back as undefined. It doesn't know what this is, right? So we have to be able to find a way to pass username into site origin so that it knows how to execute this. So if I change this down to here, you'll see we're still defining username, but here we're using that optional second argument that I talked about and setting it to the username property. And then we're passing that as the parameter of the callback function. So this signature is a little goofy because it looks like you're defining this doubly, but essentially the reason why is because this gets serialized and passed in. So you have to define the arguments that will then get serialized in the callback function to then get executed once it's there. So it's a little confusing at first, but the good thing is that most of these things are something like logging in, things like this are something you'll do like one time in your application, and then you'll use site at session or like a command, and you will just like call it, and you don't have to you won't be doing this over and over and over again. But again, here's how this works. The right way to do it. And then finally, the last one here is we're passing an unserialized value into the function. So here, username is a function that returns a string. And when functions aren't serialized, so you're going to get this error saying that, the arguments cannot be serialized. So if we change this and you go to the here, you'll see we invoke the function here so that it gives the value of the function, and instead of pointing to the function, it works. So that is site at origin, and as quick as I can give it from a high level with hopefully some examples that are helpful to you guys. I'm happy to answer questions or share. I could share the link to that repo and slides if that's helpful as well. But hopefully you find it helpful, and really hopefully it helped. I know it helps solve a lot of people's problems, common problems with Cypress. So hopefully that helps.
That is amazing. Integration testing is often one of the biggest ones that's mostly overlooked because of how difficult it often is. And that looked very, very similar to just, somebody pointed out it looks very, very similar to Jasmine and a lot of the other common framework testing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I think Demetrius had a question at the beginning. Demetrius, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it was just about you and your trip to Brazil. It wasn't about Cyprus or anything. Sorry. I just wanted to ask you, I know you said you go there for your nonprofit. Do you have to know Portuguese to go there?
No. So we have interpreters that the countries we go to are typically like Portuguese or Spanish. I know poquito Spanish, just a little bit, enough to like order coffee or like, get in a little bit of trouble, but we rely heavily on translators. So
right, and you said that you made a career change. Sorry, maybe am I out of turn right now? I was going to ask him what his job was prior to developing.
Sure. I dive deep into this more specifically in that podcast episode, but to answer the question is I was actually my wife and I were pastoring at a church, and so we were very much involved in church ministry, and was doing freelance and creative like work on the side, and kind of started this nonprofit and kind of flipped it. So I was doing like development full time, and then just doing, started the nonprofit and kind of doing those sorts of things like on the side. So
that's super interesting. Like he went from being a pastor to a developer. All right, I really appreciate it. I'll let you do your thing now.
Do listen to that episode though, because we ask him all sorts of questions about his background, and he does a great job kind of telling his transition story there. So pretty inspiring. But Jordan, I've been watching the chat over here. I've been noticing, well, first of all, everybody says thank you. You did a great job. But I'm noticing that there's a handful of people who are pretty new to Cypress. And so
yeah.
I kind of want to ask a question on behalf of anybody who's new, but do you have recommendations for how you would suggest people get into it, and maybe just start like the first steps you would recommend taking to really get exposure to it and just start, digging in.
Yeah, I realized this at the end that I didn't preface that this is a little bit of a more advanced Cypress talk, and it sort of assumes that you've already using Cypress. But I would say a couple of things that come to mind is I know Gleb does workshops, so it's a great teaser that I'm sure Gleb can get more into. But we also have a resource that we put out recently at Cypress called learn.cypress.io, and I'll put there you go. Gleb's got it too, but it's one of the things when I first joined Cypress is I brought up like, hey, there's no official Cypress like best practices like on a lot of things, and so we kind of developed this curriculum around what we as Cypress recommend, like what is testing, like maybe you've never written a test in your life, like explaining what it is, to an intro to Cypress, to advanced like Cypress best practices. So if you're, I took it when I joined Cypress, I thought it was like, before it was released and we were like, kind of working through a lot of it, but I actually recommend, like, I think all of our new employees even take it, like go through it, because it's really helpful to even just refresh what you maybe already know or don't know, as well as like get a sort of like an official stance on like how we recommend doing testing at Cypress. So I would definitely, it's a great place to start. And then there's lots of other, there's infinite, videos and blogs and things like that out there. And certainly Gleb is probably the OG of all Cypress content. So, he's got plenty of stuff. If you search long enough, you'll find Gleb has an answer to almost every Cypress question there is. So.
Just one question that actually came up in the chat from S. Whitman. Can multi-domain Cypress testing be done across applications in an NX repo yet?
So I mean, Cypress doesn't care like how your application is structured. It's just visiting a URL. So you could use SciOrigin to test, google.com and twitter.com. Like, it doesn't care. It's just going to do its thing, the test that you tell it to run. So yeah, in theory, you could NX EDE your end-to-end application, or multiple of them, and then you could, in theory, like side of origin, switch between them into a single test. I'm not sure why you would do that, but I guess it's possible. So
it's one of the most amazing pieces of software that's installed in every one of my repos that I need to learn.
What, NX or Cypress?
Cypress.
Oh.
I have NX, and so I have Cypress everywhere. I need to learn it. Thank you for inspiring me. That was an amazing talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. We appreciate it. But all right, let's get into Gleb and Gleb's talk. We're eager for this, and thank you everybody for your patience. I know we're kind of running over, so good thing it's all really worthwhile content though. And I'm just so grateful to have all three of our speakers sharing everything they are. So Gleb, let me kind of introduce you here, and we'll get into some questions with you as well. I love these questions. But for those of you who don't know Gleb, he is a JavaScript ninja, an image processing expert, and software quality fanatic. During the day, Gleb is making the engineers more productive at Mercari US, and then and that's where at Mercari he works as a senior director of engineering.
Yeah.
And then at night, Gleb is often found fighting off software bugs, and he blogs about his programming adventures on his blog, Gleb Bahmutov. And sorry, did I say that correctly?
It's very good, bro.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. .com. But I do want to say, because we just had some questions over in the chat about, what books would you recommend? And I think there's good books to read, but I would honestly promote people to go look at blogs, because there are blogs like Gleb's that are so worthwhile that's where I would start personally. I'd go read, stuff like that. So definitely go check out his blog and his website. And then also, I think these are really cool and very worth mentioning, Gleb. So he's a GitHub star and Circle CI ambassador, Microsoft MVP, and ex-Cypress distinguished engineer, and then an Algolia ambassador. So quite the background, great experience. Definitely, we're so grateful to have you here and to be sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us. And your talk is all about HTTP. So this will be
Yes.
really great. And I'm excited because I've always been a history buff and I love learning about the history of different technologies. And, these are things I don't think that people really dive into very often. So I think when we can, it's great. But not just the history of it. You're going to talk about kind of the current state of HTTP and even
Yeah.
where things are projected to go. So definitely eager to hear your thoughts on that. But I'm curious. I have some questions for you. So on your website, you say that you've shared over 500 blog posts, which is amazing. It's hard enough just to write one. So 500 is like a huge accomplishment. But I would love to know, because I think whether you're just getting into programming or whether you've been in it for a while, I think you can always contribute something. There's always somebody coming in behind you who doesn't know as much as you do. But what have been some of the things that you've personally and professionally, kind of gotten out of writing so many blog articles?
I'm writing them for a very simple reason, not to even make Jordan happy. I'm writing the blog post because I forget things, right? That's it. And I was so tired of professionally kind of, oh, I know how to do this. I know I've done it, but I've forgotten, right? It's so frustrating. And so it would end up at each company, I would write like little company wiki with whatever we were doing. And then you would move to another company and you lose all of it. And after like doing it twice, I was like, there is no way I'm updating any company wikis anymore. I'm updating my own blog. If I come up with a solution, I'm making an example so that I can understand it later, and I'm just putting on my blog. That's it. Like a craftsman who kind of like acquires their own tool, right? As they go along, right? You're no longer using company tools, you bring your own. So for me, the blog post is just like remind myself how to do things from like, I started a blog 9 years ago. All right, from back in the day. That's it. And you're asking like, how do you write so many blog posts? Like I've written one today because I was trying to kind of figure out myself how to do one thing. And I was like, let me just write it down. So you always write it like one kind of paragraph at a time. And
Nice.
that's it. And after a while, you're like, wow, I have 100 blog posts. Well, and then it kind of develops.
Yeah, I like that because it's going right along with what Carl said earlier about how he kind of journals and keeps things. And
Yeah.
it's just another way to put the things in your mind down on paper and have something to refer back to. So cool. I love that. And well, yeah, I'll move on. That was perfect. What movie have you watched more than any other movie? Like, 2 or 3 times. Like, what movie is just your absolute favorite?
It's an interesting question. I'm blanking right now, but I'll tell you what I'm watching right now for the last probably 3 months.
Okay.
Probably I've seen it 10 times. Mandalorian on Disney Plus, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I watched it once. My son was like, with Stan, watched it with me a couple times. Like we just like watch it, then immediately go back to the first episode. I think that TV series hits everything perfect, and I actually don't like Star Wars at all.
Oh, nice.
Right? I don't care about Star Wars. I haven't seen any new ones. But the interesting thing about Mandalorian, after you watch it, Disney Plus has this 7-episode behind the scenes how they actually shot Mandalorian.
Right.
That thing will blow your mind. They came up with a couple of things that was never done before for video editing. Absolutely go watch it like today.
Nice.
You will see, like, even if you don't care about Star Wars, the way the new technologies were done for that TV series is mind-blowing. And my degree is in computer vision. And I was watching, I was like, wow, this is so simple and yet so perfect. Like, it's absolutely incredibly interesting.
It is.
So The Mandalorian is my answer.
Yeah, well, and I love it too, because back when the original Star Wars movies were made, George Lucas was innovating then, and they're just doing it again. But Jordan, I'm pointing at you, my friend, because he told us recently that he's never watched Star Wars. So here's your opportunity. You've gotta go watch these behind the
I
scenes.
know. You're gonna throw me under the bus like this. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I might have to do that though.
Yeah.
Does this qualify as me watching Star Wars if I
Yes.
watch this then?
I will count that.
Gleb won't. So.
It's fine, right? Like,
okay,
just watch it. The Mandalorian story is amazing, and so if you watch behind the scenes, you'll be like, wow, this is the current cutting edge of movie, I guess shooting and graphics.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, excellent answer. Last question. Kind of on a more serious note, but I think really, really important. It's just that we know, all of us, I think, can understand how stressful it can be to be a programmer sometimes, and it can just be so mentally taxing. So have you found some strategies or things that you do that you've found that really help you to stay healthy mentally?
Okay, it's a hard question. I agree. Thank you, Brooke. You have to have interest outside of your work, right? First of all, right? Your job is not your whole life. So make sure that you have, something else that you care about. And it could be hobbies, interest, family, traveling, whatever it is. The one thing that I think helped me recently was, to be remote. I've been remote for 5 years. And being flexible with time allows me to take care of my son, play soccer, coach soccer, right? Do climate related things. Like it's the flexible time schedule allows you to kind of, okay, I'm productive for 2 hours, and then I'm blocked because I blocked my time calendar, and I'll do something else, and then I'll go back to work, and then I'll do something more, right? I think that lets you stay kind of healthy mentally.
Nice. It is hard, but it's so important. I think especially nowadays, there's just like this constant, attack kind of on our mental health. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's really helpful to hear. So let's get into your talk though. Let's learn all about HTTP, and I will just turn it over to you.
Let me see if I can share. Okay, I shared successfully. Right, I just have this extra window. Okay, I hope you can see my slides.
Yes.
And first of all, I want to thank Brooke for inviting me. I want to thank every organizer of every meetup, every conference, because I know it takes effort and persistence and constant work, right, behind the scenes to organize any kind of event. So thank you so much. Thanks to every organizer. And the slides are online. You can see the link, slides.com/Bahmutov HTTPN. And if I can bring the chat, I'm going to post it in the chat as well so that you have the link right away. Okay, let's start. And I usually start my presentations with a quick slide about the current global climate crisis. We are truly in a bad position right now, right? Like I'm not trying to scare you or not, but it's not going to, affect your children's life. It's going to affect you and in a very bad way. The most scariest thing to me are the droughts that are coming. As you know, half of the United States are in severe drought right now. And in the next couple of years, it's going to be like Sahara in many parts of the world. And your food production, everything is going to be affected. I think survival is possible. We have to act now, right? You can join many organizations. And I think my life, my children's life, your life, and the life of everything on this planet is more important than profits of a few companies. Okay, about me, I had a nice career, kind of going from C++ days and computer vision through CoffeeScript to JavaScript. And now I do everything related to Node, JavaScript testing. And as Brooke said, you can find my blog and my GitHub projects all online. I'm a senior director of engineering at Mercari. That's what I joined after Cypress. And I joined by invitation of a CTO who used to be my CTO 13 years ago. So like my advice to anyone starting the career is that you probably will find your first job based on sending resumes and interviews and skills, but kind of take the view that your second job, third, and so on will be hopefully by invitation of people who you work with. So maintain those connections. They will be very helpful. Mercari is an online marketplace. We are active in US and Japan. But before this, before I became a developer, I was a researcher, or I went to grad school and was working on a thesis. And if you are in academia, all you do research based on published work, and you're trying to publish yourself. And if you don't publish papers in conferences and magazines, there is no future for you at the university, right? So you constantly reading papers or trying to read references. And at the end of each scholarly paper, there is a list of references. And every time you kind of say, oh, this was proved here, and you have to give the name of a paper and a reference. And so 30 years ago, there was a researcher at CERN in Europe. He was just like a visiting researcher, like contract engineer, pretty much, from Great Britain. And he was so sick of constantly going to the library to find the magazine, just to read it. And then, okay, I need to find more references and read them. So but he decided, okay, why don't we have computers do it for you? After all, it's just text. So imagine I have a system where I'm reading the text, it shows it to me, and then I'm interested in particular paper, and I'm just like clicking on the reference itself, and it will go fetch it and show it to me. So I don't have to even get up. So he has written this proposal to his boss, and the boss replied, it's vague, but exciting. So this is the highest compliment I'm shooting for from now on, vague, but exciting. And so he goes back and he builds the first, what we would call right now, browser. And it looked a little bit like, a mixture between editor and a browser, right? And you can see that initially the menu had edit on top of find, because if you're starting with nothing, well, there's nothing to actually read. You have to be able to write first. And so that was a system that he developed to actually load HTML documents, and he came up with HTML standard or format as well, based on existing technologies. And he came up with a server that would actually serve you those HTML documents. And a few years later, the first version of like something that looks like complete modern browser was built. So now it's no longer a prototype. It's several HTTP servers serving HTML documents, and it looks a lot like what we have today. And this whole system consists of several parts, right? And the most important or underlying technology would be Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP as it's abbreviated. So it was created in 1991. This is a version of a protocol. The complete version that's now is known as HTTP 0.9. And that's the whole thing. That's the whole specification. It only has 4 parts: connection, request, response, disconnection. And now we know that port 80 is kind of this magical port. Well, he picked it because it was a nice round number, and it was not taken by any other existing services. So that's why 80 was chosen. It just was a random available port. The TCP connection is broken by the server after it sends you the document. That's it. The only thing you could do is to get a text document. There were no images, nothing, right? Simple GET request meant to send you the ASCII text. There was not even error codes. If the server could not find you the right document when you ask it, it would just like send text like not found. And you as a human user would know, yeah, the document is not there. My link URL is wrong. And you can only get documents. There were no cookies, no server state. And to me, this is like a perfect example of what Carl would call, you're not going to need it. Yeah, the users want this, but they probably don't need it. And the only thing that you can see is like, what does it solve? Well, it solves you reading HTML document and then seeing a link, and you think to yourself, I want to read that link, right? And so you would click on that, and the browser would go to somewhere on the World Wide Web. And in reality, it doesn't go to the remote server. In reality, the viewer of a browser would use the underlying existing protocols, right, called transfer control protocol, TCP, or internet protocol, and they would like route it to the right browser, and the browser would send the document. So the transfer control protocol, TCP, controls like how a big request is actually gets sent, and internet protocol controls like how do you find the server to send it to. The most important thing about the protocol was this little stipulation that said future versions have to be compatible, backwards compatible. And this what defines the biggest worry or the biggest problem with HTTP for a while. They had to be backwards compatible. And if you think about 991 is 31 years ago, so the airplanes developed really slowly. Right? If you were trying to fly on an airplane that's only 30 years old after it was created, you would not even get on it. It would be unsafe. But what worked for World Wide Web is that it exploded. Like every year, the number of public websites created was like multiplied by 10. It was completely exponential. And of course, once it kind of goes away from the academia, people start asking for features. Right? People ask, hey, can I see this cat JPEG image? So all of a sudden, this protocol that was nice and simple and small became, oh, wait, we actually gonna need a bunch of stuff. And so the next version of a protocol already expanded from a page and a half, it became 60 pages long. And now the request for HTML documents kind of look like what we know and love today. Now we can send non-HTML images, we can have methods, we can send data. The protocol did not specify GIF or GIF, but it had status code and user preferences and formats and content type. And after a while, there was so much going on that it was time to kind of catch up. Different browsers implemented different specifications or different aspects, different extensions, and the protocol had to catch up, and that's where version 1.1 came up. And it went through a lot of drafts, a lot of revisions, where different browsers had extensions. And after a while, they kind of merged together and they said, yeah, this is what we will agree on. And it became a new draft and eventually a new standard. Things like performance were important, the caching, right? The security became obvious once everyone was using the web. We were running out of IP addresses, and now you had to host multiple domains on a single IP. And under the hood, it's still the same idea, right? You're reading HTML, you see a link, you click on it, and like, give me this page, and it would go to the server, and the server would send the response, and then you close the connection, you just read that document. Now, it kind of appears to the users that HTTP 1.1 was uniform, all nicely implemented, all kind of like nice sitting in that box, and you just use it, the box, right? In reality, of course, there were multiple different implementations, backwards compatibility, all that. And I do recommend a book that you can read. It's very, very approachable, really interesting read, The Tangled Web. It's a little bit dated now, but I think you'll get the gist of how difficult it is to write a modern browser, how difficult it is to upgrade a standard or create a new web server. For me, the biggest problem with the modern web is the security, right? Because we do so much e-commerce and so much of our data is in the browser. Every time you open the browser, you get attacked. And that's why if you, for example, ask for github.com, you get a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't in original HTTP, but now is. Things like cookies, caching, security headers. Also, you will see a lot of things that are not a single document. You will see that a single page now requires lots of requests to load because there's so many services involved in actually giving you that page. And the big thing for us was, different things implemented on top of HTTP, on top of HTML, like Ajax. So Carl said about Gmail. So the Gmail became popular because it took us away from a static page. So this original idea came from actually Internet Explorer. It was the first browser that allowed to embed part of a site on another site through iframe, right? Where you would actually ask two different servers for parts of a page. And then right there, they create a XML HTTP request, and that was a way to actually give you more data without reloading the full page. And first it was plugin, but then Gmail and Kaya came along and showed how you can create a dynamic full web application just sitting there in your page where you interact, right? And it became an official standard. And so what we have today is, on top of HTTP, we have all these protocols that we create, like REST, GraphQL, right, that are now using JavaScript to actually communicate, not as HTML. So now the web is more complicated. So you have this HTTP1 connection going to a server. You also have bidirectional WebSocket connections where you have persistent connection. And you also can have peer-to-peer connection where you don't involve the server, maybe just for initial connection, but you directly communicate with another browser. And of course, in between HTTP connections, you can have service workers. The service worker is very interesting development, right? It's literally blurring the line of what is the web server and what is running in your browser. And the biggest problem with the World Wide Web is that if the server is down, you have nothing. This is not a desktop application. This is literally, you cannot do anything. And so originally, they were trying to do app cache manifest, where you would statically list resources to cache in a browser or fallback mechanism, and it did not work very well, right? It's very hard to be flexible yet powerful. So they created a service worker. So imagine your browser window or tab has its own rendering, it has its own JavaScript event loop, and then you can have web workers, and then you have another thing that separately sits outside the page, right? But if a browser requests something, that service worker can actually intercept the request, and it can transform it or return right away a cache response, or it can send it to the server responds, and service worker gets access to the data first, and it can, for example, cache it and then return back to the browser. And of course, offline support is the number one, but also you can do all sorts of interesting things. But most important, be secure, right? Because if an attacker can load their own script, then it has access to everything that the page sends. So it will be very hard to actually clean it up. So my only advice is try to protect yourself from attacks like scripting attacks. So people start using HTTPS, right? You don't want the attacker to substitute their own service worker or point to their own server or see the traffic that your page is sending to the server. So you have to use HTTPS. And all APIs that browser allows you to do nowadays that are interesting is either localhost or HTTPS. And the organization that really moved the ball towards secure internet was Let's Encrypt. Before they came along and gave everyone a free certificate, you had to pay for it, right? And now everything is free. Now, HTTPS is all great. Unfortunately, it allows, or it requires extra connection or extra hops to the server so that you can create the secure connection first. And this adds lag, it adds round trips to the server, it actually adds more time and makes every connection to the server kind of more expensive in terms of time, right? Okay, so here's where the web is moving today, right? So we had HTTP1, and all this HTTPS stuff on top of HTTP means we had slow websites, because our websites are very, very different from what we had them before, right? So imagine New York Times, and I'm trying to play it, but for some reason it's not playing. Sorry about that. But you can see the DevTools on the right. So even a single NewYorkTimes.com, which is interactive graphical application with charts and graphs and videos and everything, requires a couple of hundred. So in this case, it shows 250 free connections or resources to actually render. This is a long cry from this, how the internet started and what HTTP was meant to do. So the question is like, how do you load 200 connections quickly if you require separate connections, separate HTTPS for each one? How do you say this resource is important, load it first, this one can wait? How to avoid duplicate data? Because if you're sending all those request headers, right, like but 2 kilobytes of request response headers, you would actually send a lot of extra data, which is the same. And so people measured it and they kind of came up with this. Our website are not slow, especially on mobile devices, because we don't have enough bandwidth. No, it's the round trip, right? That's the latency. That's what actually makes the website slow. Every time you go and you have to fetch something, that's the expensive part. That's why websites are slow. So people noticed it and they decided, hey, we need to do something about it. So Google started prototyping a protocol called Speedy, and right away it shows a huge improvement in speed, right? And it's a binary multiplex protocol. So it became a standard, but let me explain what the Speedy was. Instead of a single connection where you send text request and then you get some headers and then the data, instead it's a binary. Every part of a request and response is chunked up in those little boxes, and each one is encoded, so it becomes smaller, and everything is kind of uniform, right? It's almost like container ships, right? Everything can be sent on any container ship because it's all the same. So instead of kind of opening a connection every time to go to a specific server, you can open a single HTTP2 connection and then send multiple things up and down in this single logical connection. So you don't have to pay overhead for actually creating that connection for each resource. And instead, you can just send multiple resources across a single connection. You can also specify which things are more important. So you can say, okay, give A 12 boxes or box slot, like empty slots, and B 4. So you kind of give 3 times more network bandwidth to resource A. You can specify prioritization, saying first load D and then C. And you can make it very complex. D and then load C and then load A and B, but give A 3 times more resources than the B. Another thing that GP2 solves are all these headers, right? The headers are huge because of security, caching, and so on. So the creators of HTTP2 are doing header compression. Instead of always sending all the headers, they first of all encode them. They don't have to send like content type and the whole string. They just say header number 1, header number 2, and so on. And they also only send the differences. So if you already sent the same headers, you can now for each next resource just send a difference in particular header. So really nice. And HTTP2, of course, with the changes, change some of the performance practices. We all kind of program the web in some capacity, right? And we all know like some kind of rule of thumb. So between HTTP2 and HTTP1, some practices still stay the same. For example, optimize your images, right? Maybe decide what should come first and what can wait, right? So all these performance practices kind of ultimately mean do less work, send less data. But then there are some things that are different. For example, there used to be a concept of domain sharding. Instead of loading everything from one domain, you would actually put your images on one domain and your code on another so that the browser can request those in parallel. All that is gone. You even don't have to concatenate resources. You don't have to inline as much because now browser open a single connection and can get those resources. But I would actually give you a word of caution. Measure first. What you think was true a couple of years ago probably is not true today, but nobody knows. So unless you actually measure your website performance, you actually might be hurting yourself. Okay? Now, speaking of performance, after HTTP was adopted, and was used for a couple of years, people actually started noticing a problem. And the problem is the Achilles heel of HTTP2. Let's say you have a single connection and you have all those boxes, right, on a single connection. If a packet is lost, if a box is lost, everything after it stops, right? And you have to request that particular box or packet again, because that's how HTTP works. It actually guarantees you in-order delivery. So if a packet is lost, everything has to wait until the packet is resent. So that became a huge problem. And once people started measuring the real-world performance of HTTP2, even with like 1 or 2% packet loss, HTTP2 became slower than HTTP1 because everything was kind of waiting for those packets to be resent. So here's our situation. We have HTTP2 on top of TCP. TCP gives you an order of packets guarantee that makes it difficult to do anything about stalling, right? So if you want to solve a performance problem and TCP is a problem, your only alternative is to use the user datagram protocol, or commonly shortened as UDP, which is alternative to TCP. Okay, now you might ask, why can't you come up with another protocol? There is no way anything like this happens, because the World Wide Web and the internet has billions of devices. Not just what you see or use like your laptop or your phone, but all the proxies and routers and switchboards installed that cost billions, if not trillions of dollars. No one's inventing third protocol at this layer, so you better like use one of those. Okay, so the quick, as it was known, protocol is like implementation of HTTP on top of UDP. It's like Speedy, it's a binary protocol, but did not use TCP. Instead, used UDP that doesn't guarantee delivery, doesn't guarantee order, so Quick implements those things itself. And the interesting thing, so Speedy became the standard in 2015. By that time, people were already working on Quick. And I've done this presentation a couple of times, right, over the years, because this is an interesting topic to me. And I would show this kind of chart and I would say, yeah, the Quick is there, but only like Google properties serve. Nobody really uses it outside, right? No servers supported, no libraries, client, and so on. But now this chart is green. Pretty much everyone now supports Quick protocol. And a couple of years ago, it became officially known as HTTP3. And there's a latest development. This month, it became official standard, right? As opposed to kind of draft, it became official HTTP3 RFC 9114. So it's a good month to do this presentation because this just has happened. Okay, so here's my conclusion. I kind of went through multiple iterations of HTTP protocol and kind of related things, right? And every version that came out in response to the problem that was seen in the real world. And more than that, the problem was not obvious when the protocol was proposed, right? This is ultimate, you're not going to need it. You release something, it becomes popular, more users start using it, and now you notice, wait a minute, we need caching, we need security, right? We need performance, but in a different way. Okay, so the problem was not apparent where you're planning and designing the protocol. The problem became apparent when you start using it. And, HTTP 0.9, my problem was just show me HTML document. HTTP 1, wait, everyone wants to see documents, images, post things, and so on. Ajax, hey, I don't want to reload the page. I need a problem. I want to see the data that changes on the server. WebSockets, I want to communicate in real time. Service worker, I needed to cache things, and I need powerful caching, like scriptable caching. HTTP2, well, modern websites are so complex and they require so many resources that they're very slow to load. And finally, HTTP3, wait a minute, real world has packet loss. We cannot do fast websites based on TCP. So we need an alternative take. And I guarantee that tomorrow, or maybe in a few years, a new protocol will appear that will solve the problems that are just now becoming apparent after wide adoption of HTTP2 and HTTP3. And it's a good thing, right? Only the failed products stay unchanged. So this was my presentation about the history of HTTP and its current state, and maybe my view of the future. I want to thank everyone. I'll be happy to answer any questions right now, or if you have a question later, just ping me on Twitter. I'll be happy to chat about HTTP too. Thank you so much for listening.
Gleb, that was amazing. That was an amazing deep dive and brought back some nostalgia, man.
Yeah.
That was, thank you so much.
30 years and 30 minutes. That's how I should talk.
No, it's just so amazing. And just looking forward to the future. Do you have any, just any, I'm not going to put you on the spot as a futurist or anything, but do you have any predictions as to, after doing all this research, do you have a prediction about what you think will happen in the future?
I personally would venture a guess that the next iteration of HTTP would actually deal more with mobile devices and Internet of Things devices, right? Because it's a different power requirements. We need to specify what kind of things you support better, right? Right now, we only use pretty much on the Internet user agent, right? And that controls everything. And it's such a cluster of problems of using a user agent that even Internet of Things devices cannot really specify, I only support this and that, but not that, or I'm in a low power mode, so let me do this, right?
Absolutely.
So my guess is something kind of related to mobile and Internet of Things improvements.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So when did you come in your career in the HTTP 0.9 through HTTP 3?
Actually, 0.9, right? So
0.9?
I started using the internet pretty long time ago, right?
Awesome.
So I went to college in 1997, and my first year I was so excited trying to program my first HTML page, right? And I had a dot that I could not get rid of it because I did not see that it was inside the href, like complete
I remember that. So did you have a GeoCities site?
I don't think I had a GeoCities site, but I did try to program it right away, right? I went for CGI interfaces, right, with Perl, right?
Oh wow, CGI bin, old school.
Yes, and
nice.
I want to say to everyone, right? Knowing this history of HTTP, right, and kind of, for example, reading the Tangled Web gives you such a great understanding and insight why things are the way they are, right? What are the headers? What's the purpose? What's the binary? What's multiplexing? Why did we need WebRTC, right? What are WebSockets, right? It gives you a great kind of understanding of why things are the way they are, which helps every developer. Because at some point, we'll all deal with HTTP, trying to communicate with external servers or trying to show things in a browser, right? So,
thank you. I mean, yes, very insightful, amazing deep dive. I love this kind of stuff. I love history and just stuff like that. And I've been around. I started using the internet in '96, so right around the same time as you. And this was such a nostalgia trip. Thank you. It was awesome.
Absolutely. I thank you to everyone listening. I really appreciate it. And I want to say I've done this presentation probably first time 8 years ago when HTTP2 was just proposed. I was showing this is speedy. This is what's supposed to do. And so every couple of years, what I do this, right, we have a new major update. So it's a lot of fun. If you kind of adopt this presentation, right, and it's a great topic because it's not going to stop, kind of developing. So if you know it and you're interested in speaking at Meetup or conferences, please take the slides, do your own presentation. you'll never be not invited even down the line. This will never go obsolete.
I was just going to joke that, oh, you're offering me your talk, but you just literally did. Thank you.
Take it, make it your own.
That's awesome.
Take it for a spin, right? Show how this, kind of impacts your development, right, over the years and where you see it going. It's all good.
That's
awesome.
That is so much about learning with programming, though, is, taking what you learn from other people and like putting in like your own time. I feel like when you, in fact, in the chat, I was seeing some people comment on this, that when you actually take the time to turn around and teach it to other people, that's when it really sinks in the most. So that's really awesome that you are willing to share your slides like that, and take him up on it, everybody. If you want to learn more about HTTP, definitely do your own deep dive into it and try to share it with other people. So cool. Well, okay, here's what I did, everybody.
Hey, Brooke.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to stop you, but Craig has a great question.
Oh, okay, go for it.
For Gleb, and he says that great to see you call out the climate emergency. What responsibility did you see as devs that we have to communicate this to others?
Excellent, Greg. Thank you for asking that question. So I'll give you unpopular opinion, right? That many disagree among developers, right? I don't see us, for example, compressing our images to make them smaller to download solves any kind of energy, or has any kind of energy impact. I don't see our server farms, right, as having like any kind of impact aside from crypto. Crypto is unbelievably bad, but I think crypto kind of solved itself now, so I think we're past that. I'm going to put the website stopthemoneypipeline.com, right? We use fossil fuels because, first of all, they don't pay for the destruction and the problems they're causing, but also because many banks, right, and financial institutions and insurance companies finance fossil fuel projects. If we can stop it, then we solve the climate crisis. We as developers, if you work for a large company like Apple or Google, Microsoft, Meta, if you keep bringing it up inside your company, we can solve the climate crisis as developers today. If Apple, for example, that has, $200 billion in a bank, if Apple says tomorrow, we only will put that money in a bank that doesn't finance fossil fuels, that's it, right? If they move their money, if they say we're never going to use an insurance company that insures a fossil fuel projects, they can move a needle. If Apple and Google and Meta that are members of telecommunications lobby group, members of U.S. Chamber of Commerce, if they tell that we're going to quit U.S. Chamber of Commerce, if they don't adopt and support pro-climate crisis laws and policies, right? There is nothing you can do. There's nothing I can do personally or through our work that will have any kind of impact as that statement would have. So we have to pressure our employers to do this, move their money and support climate, crisis legislation, right? Rather than anything. But that's what we can do.
Okay. Thank you. I just started following you on Twitter. I can't believe I wasn't following you before. And as I'm going through your feed, you have a lot of really good feedback on that too. And thank you for your advocacy. That's I worry for my daughters. So thank you.
The best antidote to worrying and being anxious is action. Join 350 org. They're active in every city, right? Find organization. There are organizations in every city. Sunrise Movement, Citizen Climate Lobby, Greenpeace, Extinction Rebellion, right? They're all active. They all give you actionable things to do, right? It could be writing a letter, making phone call. It's right. I think it will have more impact, but picking a different, data server, for example, or cloud provider.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And
Thank you, everyone. Sorry for keeping you up late. I really appreciate listening to me.
No, thank you for being here. We just appreciate it.